All right, so let's jump right into this whole thing with Trump's peace plan for the war in Ukraine. It's definitely not something you see every day, a newly elected U.S. president drawing up peace plans. But here we are, and it's not just any peace plan. Trump's proposal is raising eyebrows with its kind of unconventional approach.
Yeah, it's definitely not the usual way of doing things, especially when you think about it, it's being proposed while the conflict is still very much going on.
Exactly. And we're talking about some pretty big concessions being put on the table here. A 20-year delay for Ukraine to join NATO, a demilitarized zone along the current front lines, and even the possibility of Ukraine giving up some territory.
Yeah, this whole give and take approach is definitely unusual, and it really raises some important questions like what's really interesting is how Russia has responded. They've just flat out rejected the plan.
Which, on the surface seems kind of surprising, right? You'd think some of these concessions, like delaying Ukraine joining NATO, would be exactly what Russia wants.
You would think so, yeah. But when you really look at the statements from Putin and Lavrov, there's a clear and I think deliberate dismissal of the whole plan. Putin even kind of brushed off that proposed 20-year delay for Ukraine joining NATO. He said, what difference does it make to us today, tomorrow, or in 10 years?
So it doesn't sound like the timeline is the main issue here. If it's not about that 20-year wait, what is it that's really driving Russia's rejection? What's the bigger picture they're looking at?
That's the million-dollar question everyone's asking. Timothy Ash, who really knows this region well, has offered some insights. One possibility is that Putin's playing a bit of a game here, a calculated bluff. Maybe he's rejecting this plan just to try and get even better terms in some future negotiation.
Oh, so you're saying this could be like a classic Putin power move,
Yeah.
trying to leverage the whole situation to get what he wants.
Exactly. He's not exactly known for backing down.
Hmm.
But Ash also points out that Putin might not be in such a strong position as he's making out. This war has really taken a toll on Russia. We're talking military losses, economic strain, the whole 9 yards.
Makes sense. Wars are expensive on so many levels.
Exactly. And then you have Trump coming in with this image of a strong leader. He's got that reputation for making deals and getting things done. And let's not forget that a longer conflict could actually benefit the U.S. in some ways. Like we might see increased arms sales, for example.
So there's a lot going on here, a really complex dynamic. Russia's digging in their heels, but they might be doing it from a position of weakness. So how does all of this affect Ukraine? Where do they stand in the middle of all this?
Well, initially, Zelensky took a pretty hard line. He insisted on getting back all of Ukraine's lost territory, including Crimea, before even considering a peace deal. He was totally unwavering on that point about defending Ukrainian sovereignty.
Right, he was incredibly firm on that. But now that there's this new peace plan on the table, has Zelensky's position changed at all?
It's interesting, actually, we are seeing some signs of a shift in his approach. He seems to be suggesting a more practical way forward now. He's talking about making NATO protection for the territory Ukraine currently controls the priority, and leaving the issue of getting back lost areas for diplomatic efforts down the line.
Wow, that's a big development. Zelensky, who is known for being so unwavering, is now signaling he might be willing to compromise. This could be a real turning point in the negotiations.
It definitely highlights how tough things are for Ukraine and how urgently they need those security guarantees. But this leads us to another complicated issue, the whole question of Ukraine joining NATO.
Right, because it's not as easy as just saying welcome to NATO.
Yeah.
There are so many things to consider.
Exactly. That's a real catch-22. NATO members have said publicly that they support Ukraine eventually joining, but they're incredibly wary of letting in a country that's actively at war with Russia.
Because triggering Article 5, that mutual defense clause, would mean every NATO member would get pulled into the conflict.
Exactly. So even if Ukraine agreed to postpone joining NATO, the fact that they'd be joining while still at war with Russia is a huge risk for the whole alliance.
So if immediately joining NATO isn't realistic, what is Zelensky looking for as an alternative? What kind of security guarantees is he demanding?
He's been very clear that he needs really strong security guarantees one way or another. This could mean direct military support from Western countries, or what's even more interesting, the idea of giving Ukraine the resources and weapons to defend itself effectively, kind of like Israel or South Korea.
So basically arming Ukraine to the teeth to prevent future attacks. But there's this other unexpected twist to the whole situation that I found really fascinating. This potential energy front involving Slovakia.
Ah, yes, this really adds another layer of complexity to everything. It shows how interconnected this whole region is. Let me explain what's happening. A big chunk of Russian gas travels through Ukraine to get to Slovakia, and this flow of energy has become a potential flashpoint for conflict.
And Zelensky has even made some pretty direct accusations against Slovakia about this gas transit, right? What's the deal with those accusations?
He's accusing Slovakia of not fully cooperating with Ukraine's efforts to control the gas pipelines and ensure that the energy keeps flowing safely. It really shows how the impacts of this war reach way beyond the actual battlefields and how it could potentially drag other countries into the conflict.
Yeah, this energy front could definitely escalate tensions and bring other players into the mix,
Yeah.
making finding a way to peace even harder.
Absolutely. It throws another wrench into the already complex web of interests and alliances in the region.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really shows how interconnected the whole region is. You know, what seems like just an energy dispute could actually have these ripple effects that end up impacting the whole peace process. You can
Yeah.
see how easily things could escalate in Slovakia and just make the search for peace even more complicated.
It's a tangled web for sure, with so many different things pulling in different directions. Let's try to step back for a minute and look at the big picture. We've talked about Trump's peace plan, Russia's rejection, and how Ukraine's position is evolving. So what does all this tell us about the chances of actually finding a peaceful solution? Is there any hope for ending this conflict?
Well, it's such a fluid situation. It's really hard to say what will happen. There are just so many factors involved. But I think we can try to pinpoint a few key things that will probably shape how things unfold.
Okay, let's break those down. What are the most important things to keep an eye on?
I think first and foremost, we need to figure out what Putin's really after. Is he truly not willing to budge? Or is this tough stance just a tactic? What are his ultimate goals in Ukraine? Until we have a better idea of what his endgame is. It's tough to assess the chances of a negotiated settlement.
It's like his true intentions are still a bit of a mystery.
Exactly. And that makes it really hard to predict what he'll do next. The second really crucial factor is Ukraine's need for those security guarantees. Zelensky has been crystal clear that any peace deal has to include strong guarantees for Ukraine's safety in the future, whether that's through NATO membership, strong Western support, or some combination of the two. Those security guarantees are non-negotiable for Ukraine.
I mean, they've learned the hard way about how dangerous it is to be vulnerable, and they want to make sure they're safe in the future.
Exactly. No country wants to be caught off guard again, especially after going through such a devastating conflict. And then finally, we can't forget about the bigger geopolitical picture. This war in Ukraine has really strained relations between Russia and the West. It's changed alliances and created new points of tension all over the world. How these dynamics play out will definitely have an impact on any peace talks that happen.
It's like a giant chess game, isn't it? Where every move has consequences that are felt around the globe. We've got Putin's ambitions, Ukraine's need for security, and this constantly changing geopolitical landscape, all interacting in ways that are really hard to predict. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. But even with all this complexity, I do think there's a glimmer of hope. The fact that both sides are at least talking, even if it's indirectly, suggests that they're open to exploring ways to resolve this. And Zelensky's shift in position, even though it's out of necessity, shows a level of pragmatism that could open doors for compromise.
So you're saying even in this incredibly difficult situation, there are some signs that things could move forward.
I think so, but it's going to take flexibility, creative thinking, and a willingness to go beyond the usual solutions. We need to look at options that might break the mold of traditional diplomacy.
Speaking of creative solutions, I came across an interesting idea while I was preparing for our deep dive. It's a little outside the box, but it raises some thought-provoking questions about how we think about security in the 21st century.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about this outside-the-box idea.
What if the key to lasting peace in Ukraine isn't about giving up territory or traditional alliances, but something totally different? What if it's about creating a whole new kind of security framework for Ukraine?
That's intriguing. You're suggesting something that goes beyond the usual model of NATO membership.
Yeah.
Something that still provides those strong guarantees that Ukraine needs to feel safe and deter any future aggression.
Exactly. Imagine a pact where a group of countries, not just NATO members, pledge to defend Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It could include military support, intelligence sharing, economic assistance, a whole package designed to make attacking Ukraine completely unthinkable.
That's a pretty bold idea. It would require a major shift in thinking, moving away from those Cold War-era alliances that have dominated global security for decades. It would take a lot of diplomacy to get everyone on board.
It would be a huge challenge, no doubt. But it could be a way to address the core concerns of everyone involved. Maybe it's exactly what we need in this new geopolitical landscape. We're facing challenges that don't fit into the old categories, so maybe it's time for solutions that break the mold.
I agree. It's like we need Security 2.0 for the 21st century. A system that's more agile, more inclusive, and more responsive to the complex threats we see today.
You got it. We need a system that recognizes that security isn't a zero-sum game, and that collective action is crucial to deterring aggression and promoting peace. This security pact idea is definitely worth thinking about, don't you think?
Absolutely. It highlights a really crucial point. The path to peace in Ukraine
Hmm.
might not be about just repeating what's been done before, but about creating new paths, embracing new ideas, and building a future,
Hmm.
where security is a shared responsibility, not something that's just for a select few.
Yeah, it really does make you think, what if we could create a more peaceful world by just changing how we think about security? I know it might sound a little idealistic,
Yeah.
but sometimes the best solutions come from challenging those old ways of thinking.
I'm right there with you. And this whole conversation about the Trump's peace plan really shows that. The situation in Ukraine needs fresh thinking and bold action. We can't just keep doing things the same way.
Exactly. We have to think bigger, bolder, and more creatively if we want lasting peace in Ukraine.
You're absolutely right. The stakes are so high, and the human cost of this conflict is just unimaginable. We can't ever forget that.
Very well said. So after all this unpacking and analyzing and exploring, here's what I'm taking away from our deep dive today. The road to peace in Ukraine is going to be long and difficult, with a lot of obstacles along the way.
There'll definitely be setbacks and disagreements,
Right.
and times when it feels like there's no hope left. That's just how these complex conflicts go.
But I also believe there's a real desire for peace, both
Yeah.
within Ukraine and around the world. People are tired of the violence and the instability.
And that desire for peace, along with innovative thinking and a willingness to compromise, might actually be strong enough to overcome all the challenges. It's not going to be easy, but it's possible.
That's a good thought to hold on to. And for those of you listening, I want to leave you with this. Never underestimate the power of ideas. Sometimes the most radical concepts, the ones that seem impossible at first, are the ones that can really change the world. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a future where peace wins. Until next time, keep diving deep.